Attorney General Barr, saying something today that is, on the one hand, entirely ordinary. The election is over, and there was no widespread voter fraud. But on the other hand, that is also big news and allegedly news to Donald Trump after all the battles where Barr loyally, politically took Donald Trump's side in public. Barr doing an AP interview to reaffirm no evidence of systemic voter fraud. Now, we always try to keep it real with you, so let's be clear. If this sounds a little familiar, it is because it's a PR rerun of what Bill Barr already put on paper after the election, that there was no major voter fraud. In fact, it was just days after the election when the media-savvy Attorney General tried to give Donald Trump one last little itty-bitty sugar high. A couple of headlines as a balm for the loss, and he released this official-looking memo. And the very night that news broke, if you were with us, you may recall, we reported that legally the memo was just bad news for Trump because it found no voter fraud. And it only lightly tweaked the timeline for any unlikely voter fraud probes. Now, I'll tell you, we look back at this. Barr actually did get some dramatic headlines like this. That's from that night, not tonight, which had the New York Times implying there was some big special new authority, which was a bit of a stretch. Now, here we are 3 weeks later, and Barr is delivering all of this as one more predictable chaser. Because today's scoop offered to the press will show you right here. You can judge for yourself. It was already in the fine print from that original memo about 3 weeks ago, stating that fraud and irregularities did not change the outcome of any election. So Donald Trump's not getting the answers he wants from the top lawyer in government. And in a sign of Trump's lack of control over Barr, at least on this matter right now, Trump wasn't calling DOJ or calling him in for a meeting. He was just reduced to plaintively tweeting at the outgoing AG today. But let's be clear. None of that means that Donald Trump's powers as a chief executive are over yet. Far from it. He is the president. And one of the president's greatest unitary or unreviewable powers is over pardons. And we now have reporting that Donald Trump has begun discussing giving a pardon to his own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. The two discussing a preemptive pardon as recently as last week, the New York Times reports. Now, those famed prosecutors in the Southern District of New York have been investigating their former chief, Giuliani, reportedly over his Ukraine work, which, of course, helped get his client impeached.
Rudolph Giuliani under investigation for his role in Ukraine.
We learned that federal prosecutors in New York are investigating Giuliani's consulting firm.
Rudy Giuliani is under investigation by the U.S. Attorney in New York.
Now, there have been no reports of any indictments of Giuliani since that news broke. But here's what's really striking right now. This isn't just big news about a couple big names. Rudy Giuliani, whatever you think of him, is a famous American. What's striking is that Rudy Giuliani knows how this works, and he publicly denied committing any crimes related to all this. He said if the prosecutors there think he committed a crime, they're out of their minds. Quote, I've been doing this for 50 years. I know how to not commit crimes. And that may be true. But if Rudy Giuliani is certain that he didn't commit any crimes or pass any lines, why is he even discussing a preemptive pardon for himself? You don't need one of those unless you think you face real jeopardy. And if you're a lawyer, you know what real legal jeopardy looks like. I mean, people may be cynical about a lot of things, but courts and juries do not just convict people with no evidence. Indeed, it takes some hard evidence to get anywhere close to a unanimous verdict for a criminal conviction. And that goes to the very next legal headache at the White House right now. Donald Trump's own supporters, a very prominent one, suggesting that maybe like Giuliani, Trump himself also needs a pardon and should try to give it to himself.
If Biden never became president, I'd tell Trump, pardon yourself and pardon your family.
Now, there's no reporting on whether Donald Trump would be about to do that before he leaves office. But this is also, for your context, not a random comment. Donald Trump famously listens to Hannity. He's followed some of his past public suggestions. And CNN reports a former White House official saw Trump become obsessed with the pardon power, reportedly asking about that very thing, self-pardoning. Now, it would be unprecedented, and DOJ rules currently bar a self-pardon by the president. But there's no final word on this one from the Supreme Court. History is somewhat instructive. Remember that even though Richard Nixon resigned over his misconduct as he faced a potential Senate conviction, he still never tried to pardon himself. Why not? Well, a valid pardon would have been in his interest. That makes sense. But he ultimately was not sure that a self-pardon would be valid. Richard Nixon didn't think it would necessarily hold up. And remember, that is precisely why President Ford was the one who pardoned Nixon, so that it followed the standard order of a president pardoning someone else. Take a look after Nixon resigned.
I became greatly concerned that if Mr. Nixon's prosecution and trial were prolonged, the passions generated over a long period of time would seriously disrupt the healing of our country. We have a long record of forgiving even those who have been our country's most destructive foes.
This isn't a legal comment, but forgiveness, like the pardon power, typically goes from one person to another. You cannot logically just forgive yourself. Now, legally, the consensus among experts runs against self-pardons, which is part of also why this has never been tested. But I always want to give you the facts. That history does not mean we can say whether the Supreme Court would view this hypothetical as illegal or invalid. No one really knows. Nixon didn't do it because even though he was basically a crook by history's judgment, he ultimately, in the end, deferred to some rules and traditions. Donald Trump has not been convicted of anything making him a crook. But if he's worried that he could be, will he be the first to do something violating the ultimate tradition for chief executives? It's a big question. And one of his biggest supporters, Sean Hannity, is already trying to normalize a certain answer. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.